Hello, everybody. My name is David Pollard. I'm Executive Director of Workplace Pride. I'd like to welcome you to our latest webinar in our Keeping Members Connected series. Today, we're going to be talking about trans reintegration in the workplace. A couple of words, though, before we get started, about logistics. You can always write your chat in the chat function, and we'll be looking at these questions later on in the program today. Also, I would like to, a bit out of the script here a little bit, but I would like to make a mention of the fact that 2 days ago, the Netherlands, the country of the Netherlands, has released their nominees for their Human Rights Tulip Award, which is a human rights award. And for the very first time, they have a transgender person on the top 3 list. Her name is Lilith Matirosan. Lilith is Armenia's first registered transgender woman. She's an LGBT activist who has been committed to equal rights for all. She's the founder and current president of the Right Side Human Rights Defender NGO, which is an NGO run for trans people and sex workers in Armenia and the South Caucasus. I think this sets the tone well for the discussions we're going to be having today about the situation for transgender people in the workplace. So I'm very honored to have Petra van Dijk here next to me and 2 panelists on the line. So I'm going to go through each of them and introduce them. So Petra, from Transwerkt Nederland, can you say a few words about yourself, please?
Well, thank you, David. First of all, thank you for the webinar organized by Workplace Pride. My name is Petra. I'm a job coach and I'm a trans woman. And recently I joined the organization Transwerkt Nederland to support trans people getting ready for work, getting work or changing to work, etc., or coming out at work. So that's my job now recently.
Wonderful. Thank you, Petra. Of course, we're based here in Amsterdam. This is where the Workplace Pride studio is. And also in the Netherlands, we have then Remke Verdegem from Transgender Network Nederland. Remke, can you say a few words, please?
Thank you, David, for the short introduction. Yeah, I'm Remke Verdegem. I'm also a trans woman. In daily life, I work on the IT department of the National Archives. And furthermore, I'm a board member of TNN, Transgender Network Nederland. That's a foundation located in Amsterdam, and we're making us strong for a gender diverse society. Of course, we make us strong for the position of trans women and transgender people, and we're trying to diminish the number of discrimination against trans people, in short.
Thank you very much, Remke. And of course, Workplace Pride is an international platform for LGBTI inclusion in the workplace. So we're very honored to have Maryanne Lettieri from Argentina, from Buenos Aires, calling in. And I'm very happy to have Maryanne, particularly because it's 7:30 in the morning in Buenos Aires. So Maryanne, could you say please a few words about Contrata Trans, please?
Yes, thank you, David. Hi, everyone. My name is Maryanne Lettieri. I'm also a trans woman. I'm 33 years old and expressed my gender at the age of 11. So I live the most of my life as a trans woman. I work as a teacher at school that teach and have a lot of work with a trans community to finish their studies. And I also lead the initiative and program Contrata Trans.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Maryanne. So let's just jump right into it. Again, this whole conversation started with Petra and Workplace Pride because of the good work that they're doing with trans people in the workplace. So I'll give the floor over to Petra for her presentation.
Thank you, David. My assistant brings up the first slide. So we're going to talk about Transwerkt Nederland. The initiative came from Job Coach Connect. They were asked, can you do something about the situation for trans people, because they are struggling finding work, they are struggling with discrimination, they are afraid to come out at work. So Transwerkt Nederland was founded 1 year ago, and we are acknowledged by UWV, UWV in Dutch, the National Employee Insurance Agency, and we are supported by Remke's organization TNN, Transgender Network Nederland. Next slide, please. Transwerkt Nederland supports trans people with coaching and job coaching with special attention to their complete situation. So we're not only looking at job or not having a job, but we're also looking at the housing situation, income, psychological support in the surrounding, etc. We use experiential experts, like myself, to support trans people, and if necessary, their employer with 3 specially developed support packages. Next slide, please. Next slide. Because of the time, next slide, please. So 41% of trans people in the Netherlands is well educated. Still, 20% is unemployed or not fit to work. And 28% has a net income lower than 1,000 euros a month. Next slide, please. Trans people still face discrimination at the workplace and also during job applications. A survey by the Dutch IT service provider Peak IT showed that 20% of the supervisors and HRM managers are hesitant to hire a trans person. Another survey by Dutch consultancy organization Berenschot showed that only 20% of the Dutch companies have an active diversity policy. Next slide, please. Active diversity policy means being sensitive of all people besides being young, healthy, white, and cisgender. Policy, you have to have a policy against bullying and harassment. You have to show diversity on your website, social media, and communication throughout the whole organization from top to bottom, including top management and HRM. Furthermore, you can measure the job satisfaction, anonymous of course, and you have to include the option for people to identify as transgender or non-binary. Next slide, please. Furthermore, support the LGBTQI network, if there is any. Think about dress code, the use of pronouns, locker rooms, and gender-neutral toilets. Think also about gender-inclusive job application procedures. Hire, for instance, an experiential expert of Transwerkt Nederland with 3 support packages for companies. Next slide, please. So, gender transitional leave is already a fact in the Netherlands. The municipality of Amsterdam has one. The municipality of The Hague will follow soon. And as far as I know, the first company in the Netherlands, Unilever, has gender transition policy. So they support trans people getting into their transition process during work. And I hope a lot of companies and municipalities will follow.
All right. Thank you very much.
Am I in time?
You're on time.
Okay.
I've really pushed all the ladies to go quickly. So thank you very much. But I want to pull a couple of points out of that. I was really quite intrigued because, of course, Unilever and UWV that you mentioned are members of Workplace Pride, and we've been working with them quite a while on many LGBTI topics. But what you were saying about the packages that Transwerkt provides for employers and then also for the trans people themselves, can you go into a little bit more detail about what that really entails?
Well, because I'm an experiential expert on this, I did my transition myself at work.
Uh-huh.
And although I'm well educated and a powerful mindset, etc., a lot of support in my environment, I still face some challenges at work, and you have to prepare for those challenges. And I can assist with that, not only for the trans person, but also for the employee. But because a lot of employers are doing their best to support a trans person going into transition, but they just don't know how.
Yes.
Maybe they make the wrong choices or the wrong decisions, and they forget to talk to the trans person himself or herself. What do you want? How can we support you? So we made 3 different packages with different hours and different pricing, of course. And that's so we can mediate between the trans person and management. And we can also do presentations and workshops, etc. We can offer the whole package to make a smooth transition for both employer and employee.
I think that's fantastic, and maybe we'll hear it later on also from Maryanne, but to me that sounds groundbreaking because you're really holding the hand of the organization as well as a trans person to say, this is the way that we can work well together. And as you mentioned, with more than 40% of trans people in the Netherlands, at least, being very well educated, it's a fantastic source for employers to tap into, a very well educated and enthusiastic employees.
Yeah.
So I think we'll probably get back to these packages a little bit later. Thank you very much. But right now, I'd actually like to give the floor to Remke from TNN to give us a little more detail about the situation for transgender people in the Netherlands, because I think it's something we all need to know. Remke, floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll skip the first slide because that's just about me and working for TNN. Within TNN, I'm responsible for education and employment for work. So that's why I'm here today. I'll show you some numbers from the number of people in the Netherlands being trans. So it's about 0.6% in the Netherlands. We're just a small country. That means 110,000 people. And when you look at people who identify as non-binary, that's about 4%. And that comes to 600,000 people. And if you add that, it's a little less than 800,000 people. But that equals the population of Amsterdam. So if you put all the trans people and non-binary people in Amsterdam, it will be crowded. And there's a difference between when you're young and when you're an adult. When you look at the numbers for the young people, they identify more as gender diverse than people of my age, my generation, which is a good development, I guess. Or young people are more fluid. And even when you look at the young people who identify as trans, that's higher than people my generation. So you can see the number of trans people who identify as trans is getting larger. People are more free to make that step. But when you look at the social economic statistics of trans people, and Petra already mentioned it, when you look at the people working for a boss, a trans man and trans woman, that's considerably lower than people who identify as cisgender. It's 35% against 85 or 58 or 52%. And especially when you look at people living from a benefit, so an unemployment benefit or a disability benefit or a social assistance benefit, and you look at the number for trans women, that's 28%. So 28% of the trans women don't have an income, apart from this benefit. And when you compare that with the cis women, it's 10%. So it's almost 3 times as much, which is really alarming for TNN. And we're trying, together with Petra from Transwerkt Nederland, to change that situation. Okay. When you look at guidelines for organizations, the first thing I would say, you should have some sort of inclusion and diversity policy in place, not just for trans people, but for all kinds of diversity. But of course, you have to include your trans people. And my second advice would be prepared. So in my company, I was the first one coming out as trans, and they didn't have a clue. So all I had to do it all myself, about the gender neutral toilets, about telling my manager how to change my gender in all the official papers. So they didn't have a clue. So I told them, get some guidelines. I will help you to make those guidelines. And in these guidelines, it should offer opportunities for individual support. So in my case, there was no support apart from my own manager. And as Petra mentioned, something like a gender transition leave would be great. So when I had some sort of surgery, I just took a holiday because I didn't want to call myself sick or ill for my job. So I took a holiday. And make sure that your recruitment or selection process is gender inclusive. So make them feel at home. You can invite them actively to write a letter for a job. I think that's it, David. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Remke. I mean, it's really some some shocking statistics. If you look at the 28% of trans women,
Yeah, it is.
yeah, it's really, I mean, it shouldn't be that way. And I think there was a responsibility certainly for civil society organizations, but also for employers to take this all quite seriously. You know, a couple of years ago, Workplace Pride held a breakout session in one of our conferences all about transgender people in the workplace. And it was an eye-opening to us that employers have a huge opportunity with trans people, specifically with trans people, because they know in many cases both how men and women think. Now, for those organizations that are really looking more and more for emotional intelligence, particularly now with what's happening with Black Lives Matters, with a Me Too movement and the pandemic, of course, emotional intelligence is incredibly valuable commodity for organizations. So I'm hoping that that those organizations realize that in transgender people, particularly with so many well-educated transgender people, there's a gold mine to be had. And I can say from my own long experience working with trans people that if you do hire them, include them in your organization, they're loyal because they're willing to support those organizations to support us. But a quick question, Remke, it caught my attention also about the number of young people that are identifying differently now than what they used to. How do you see that trend developing? And do you think the current situation with the pandemic might accelerate this to some degree?
Well, I'm not sure about the pandemic, but I think that young people are much less binary than my generation is. So my generation thinks you're either a man or you're either a woman. There's nothing in between. Yeah. And when you talk to young people in classes, well, they're much more gender fluid. So I think that will make a change in the future. Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, I'm of your generation as well, so there's a big change. And now to go to another generation, let's speak with Maryanne. Maryanne, I'm really, again, quite honored to have you on this call. So I'm curious to hear about the Contrata Trans and what you're doing. So I'll give you the floor now.
Okay, thank you, David. I want to add something that we don't have in the slides. Some numbers that I heard from the girls, and I think Argentina and Latin America is quite complicated because here in Argentina, 80% of trans people work as sex workers, and 70% of that number want to leave it. So it's a lot of problem here in Argentina that those people can leave they actually work or situation, and it's because a lot of problems and I think, like we say here in Argentina, is a structure, a matrix created for a long time that we need and we want to break. Because, for example, 60% of young people are forced to leave their homes at the age of 13. Wow. So they start to think what to do with their lives at that age and survive, and they are not looking for a job or a way to study or the education. So it's very complicated here. The problem is changing, but it's a lot of work we are doing, the organizations, because the government do not have a statistic about us. We are not included in the in any sense any statistics when you check your people in your country. And I think we need to change this, and the organizations are doing a good and a hard work. That's because Contrata Trans was born with a lot of trust friends. That includes Mochacelis, which is the school that I mentioned before, where I work for education for trans people. And basically, we work in two different ways. We work with community and we work with companies. with the community, we motivate. First, we motivate to build in the self-confidence, because for a long time society has made us believe that we don't belong to some places and smashed our dreams from the youth. So we have a specific relation with the community. We attend the needies, and we try to become that family that they probably, in most cases, they didn't have. So talking about the job specifically, we help them to create resumes. We help them to change abilities into experience. Like I said before, most of the trans people has always worked as sex workers, so they always say, what can I add in my resume if I don't have any experience? No, you have abilities. So we need to change those abilities into experience. And of course, we talk to companies about the situation. We talk about, there are a lot of people with a lot of abilities. And for example, in Argentina, it's very common that a person needs to have a lot of experience to start a job. And for trans people, that's not the reality. So we work with companies to make them understand the situation. Of course, we give them support to staff selection, providing resumes, providing training. And I believe that all the work we are doing is not because I'm working in Contrata Trans, but I think is very, very useful for companies, because in this situation of pandemic and quarantine, we made a lot of insertions when the company hired a person. I think we have 20 persons hired in these 3 months of pandemic here in Argentina.
Fantastic. Go on.
Sorry.
It's okay.
No, it's okay. Basically, the Contrata Trans have a different ways to work, because we work with companies, but we work a lot with the community. So it's very, recently we have I don't know how to say in English, sorry. We have a portal for when you are a company and you want to publish a research or something, we have a portal for only with trans talent. So companies go there, and the only talent they will find is trans people. So because one of the excuses for companies is, I don't know, I publish a search and the people don't show up. So yeah. I think this break this thought.
Well, this is such admirable work that you're doing, and I think particularly in Argentina, as you were saying, where so many trans people are coming from being sex workers, which is also in many other countries around the world.
Yeah.
What I like so much about what I saw from Contrata Trans in preparation for this was your very positive, helpful attitude, and you're trying to reach out both to community and to the communities and to the employers as well, very much like Transwerkt. I wanted to mention also, Maryanne, that I see that you actually work with one of our members, Accenture. So it's positive to know, and it's quite important from an international perspective to realize that, again, many members of Workplace Pride are working all over the world, so they can make a difference. We actually had a situation in India. We had a conference in Chennai, India, about 3 years ago, in which a trans person was hired at one of our member organizations because they had taken part in this. And it was really more that the company realized there was a pool of talent, as we mentioned before, very willing and ready to be a loyal employee. I wanted to mention also that this connection with Contrata Trans actually came through the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it is on an international stage. But Maryanne, I think the figure that really shocked me the most is you said that 60% of young trans people are forced to leave their homes at 13. I don't know what companies can do for that age. It might certainly not employ people at 13, but what would you recommend that companies might be able to do, at least in Argentina, to help this, help do something about this so it's not so difficult?
I think companies can do something about this because the parents of those kids maybe work in the company. So I think we need to do. I think, like, as a society, we can do a lot of things. I think when a company, for example, start change and start to become more diverse and start to include diversity, start to change the rest of the people in the company. And maybe if your partner or your manager or your, I don't know, any person in the company in the future or in the present has a transgender kid, I think you are doing something good. And maybe you have the possibility. I think you have always the possibility to do something. Not only with I think with this number particularly that you mentioned, I think you can do a lot of things as a company working with the adults, not the child, maybe.
Very good. Companies are very powerful, aren't they? They can change attitudes. They can change attitudes in society, and they have, in my opinion, a responsibility. So thank you very much for that, Maryanne. It really, I believe, helps set the tone for how we would like to see things changed, not just for the trans community, but for LGBT community in general. So let me move on to a question for all three of you now. I think, well, Petra, you had mentioned that LGBTI networks within organizations can often have a big impact. How would you like to see that in reality? What would you like to see done by LGBT employee networks within companies when it comes to transgender inclusion?
Well, such an organization can have a look at the diversity policy of a company. Mm-hmm. And from their own point of view, from their own backgrounds, they can see the flaws in it. They can see the problems, the lack of measurements. Uh-huh. And they can keep the management sharp on executing the diversity policy. And they can encourage them to be more inclusive for LGBTIQ people, especially trans people, of course. Yeah. And I think that's a job for LGBTI networks in companies. To
help tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, in the Workplace Pride Global Benchmark, we actually have a very specific question that do you include the word transgender in your policy? And we find that very important. Remke, can you had mentioned this also on the policies of organizations. What would you like to see? What would be the ideal situation for a company to how they actually talk about this? I mean, words matter here. So what words would you like to see?
Well, first of all, I would like to have all companies to have a diversity policy in place and then specifically mention gender diversity and gender expression. So some companies do have some sort of diversity policy, but it's not explicit enough for trans people. So I would be, and TNN helped Unilever, and they made a policy catering for trans people specifically. Well, that's great, but it would be nice to include different minorities as well. But in this case of Unilever, they catered especially for trans people, which is good for our how do you say that, for our people, for our community.
I don't know if you can tell us too much more detail about that, but that's really admirable from a very large multinational like Unilever to do something like that. I don't know, was that policy actually something that is meant to be implemented worldwide by Unilever?
I'm not sure. I do hope so, David. And
Same
I think,
here.
I think it was a great policy. So the most important thing is that senior management, the board of directors, are supporting it. So it's for trans people. They say we support trans people, and it makes it difficult for colleagues to start bullying trans people because the senior management is supporting trans people. So that is really crucial for trans people in the workplace.
Yeah, just like words matter, leadership matters as well, doesn't it? And the more that we can, the more we can see in companies standing behind our community, the more powerful everyone's going to be, certainly. Yeah. Now, Remke, I don't want to go away from you yet because we had mentioned also gender neutral toilets. Now, this has been a big topic here in the Netherlands, at least. And I wondered from TNN's perspective, if you could say a word or two about how companies could or should look at that. A lot of them have made a lot of progress, but what would be the ideal situation from TNN's standpoint?
Yeah, well, the ideal situation would be neutral toilets everywhere. Like in your own home, I have one toilet. It's gender neutral, so I don't have two separate toilets. The ideal situation for TNN would be have gender neutral toilets. And that doesn't mean that men and women and different genders should be in the same space. So the toilet can still be, you can close your own toilet, but the door to enter it should be for everybody. And then there will be separate toilets with a door you can close, or a mirror. So for privacy. But that would be, for TNN, the most ideal situation, David. Yeah.
It seems so simple, doesn't it? I mean,
it is. Yeah, and what you see now is that what they are doing now, some companies, they have toilets for men, for women, and a separate one for trans people. Don't do that. Don't make trans people some sort of, I don't know, outcast or a different species. So no, we're just women in our case. So we want to make use of the women's toilet, or better, the neutral one. Yeah, gender neutral one.
And we understand, of course, that buildings need to be reconstructed, but do it. Just do it.
It's easy to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And Maryanne, do you recognize this discussion also in Argentina about gender neutral toilets?
Yeah. The discussion is, I think the problem is because the society cares about our privacy, our privacy, or our bodies. So it's always a problem when a trans person walks into a toilet. So I think that a few companies have neutral toilets, but Accenture, for example, is one of the companies that have a good diversity and policies about gender and diversity. But for example, the school where I work have a neutral toilet, and there is any problem. So I always say the same. If you look at the companies or the places where there is a neutral toilet and there is any problem, it means there is no problem. It's just a retouch that other companies have.
It's interesting. I think we just need to demystify this whole topic of toilets.
Yeah.
Again, It's just a toilet, but it's a very, very important thing for the trans community to be able to embrace, isn't it? Because it's a question of respect, and that's what we want as communities, right? All right, one final question before we go to the questions from the audience, because I understand there are several. I was wondering, since this is an international forum, what types of cooperation is there on an international level between trans-oriented organizations, and particularly regarding the workplace? Do you know of any? And I'm asking this also specifically because our member organizations and other companies would like to engage with these organizations on an international level. Do you know of anything like this?
Well, there's one organization, Transgender Europe, of course. They do a lot of work for the trans community in Europe. Originally, we invited them to participate in this webinar, but they are understaffed, so they couldn't join us. But they have a trans inclusive workplaces guideline for employers and employees. So you can look that up on the internet. And maybe
I think it's on our website as well.
Yeah, you signed it.
Yeah, I signed it.
I saw it. One more addition, if I may,
Sure.
to what companies can do for trans people.
Yeah, please.
I'm aware of the situation in Colombia. I was there 2 years ago to work with the trans community for a few days. I'm one of the advisors for Liga de Salud Trans. What they have are community centers. And companies can support those community centers, not only with money, but for instance, with education and free meal once a day for sex workers. That's very important to have healthcare and good food. And they also have a collaboration with the university in Bogota, and they do all kinds of research for the trans community. So companies can support those community centers also to help out trans people.
Oh, that's great. Maryanne, do you know if there's any other Latin American organizations for trans people, or?
Yes, in Argentina is ATA, CHA, which is the first organization in Argentina, and in the talking about regional, we have Red LAC Trans, which is integrated with countries of the Mercosur, Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile. Red LAC Trans, it's called.
By the way, this is going to be recorded, so you can make sure we'll be able to see this afterwards. But some of our members who are watching might remember that last summer, working together with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we brought 10 trans activists, Maryanne and I were discussing this beforehand, to the Netherlands to experience Pride here in the country. And it was so, we did this event called Stories from the Heart for our members. And it was so heart-wrenching and heartwarming on both sides to hear what they're going through, but also the amount of spirit that they are able to maintain. And I think for this audience here, it's again a message that we as organizations, as companies, we can play a role in supporting in society as well, as has been mentioned here. And, Workplace Pride would certainly love to help play a role here if possible. All right, now we have about a little over 20 minutes, or a little under 20 minutes left. So I'm going to give the floor to Mike Greenwood, who has been looking at some of the chats that have come in. So Mike, I'd like to ask if you can read out some of the chats, please, for our panelists.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. The chat has been alive. People have been asking questions to each other in the chat and supporting themselves with knowledge across 2 different countries in Europe. So I want to say thank you to the chat for that. First of all, Jerome from Nokia wants to say that it's interesting to see the generational difference. Does the panel have guidance as to how employees who have existing trans inclusive policies adapt and change to new generations and presumably slightly different requirements? So this is a question to all the panel about the generational difference for trans people.
Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first of all, as Remke already mentioned, we are from the older generation. I'm almost 60 now. And we are from the binary generation. So I've been in the closet about my first 52 years of my life. So I came out as trans woman, and I'm visible as a trans woman. I cannot live as a trans woman under the radar. So we are visible. Older people are visible. And younger people, they can live under the radar, so to say. That's one difference. And furthermore, you have now the non-binary people. They can reasonably be themselves. And as I told before, and Remke also, we are from the older generation, we are binary, and young people are more gender fluid. So that's another challenge for companies to include in their diversity policy non-binary people.
Okay. Actually, Maryanne, would you have any advice about that? I mean, you're from a younger generation. How do you look at all this?
I think like Petra, I think the young people do not define, most of them do not define as binary. So I think they're more gender fluid, and I think the companies must include those genders or those expressions of gender in their policies.
Yeah, I guess the question is really how they go about doing that. But just like with everything else, companies have to be flexible with their business, and they can be flexible with the LGBTI community as well, right? They should be.
Yes.
Certainly. Yeah.
That's why I said you have to have diversity in your policy. So diversity, and then explicitly mention gender expression. So it's about your expression. It's so non-binary people, and we all would like to express the way we feel. So it's fine to be it's fine to be active in everything, but make it explicit in your policy. That's okay to have a gender identity, and it's okay to have a different gender expression. So it doesn't matter as long as you're supported by your company.
And you know what, just to add to that, we've always found that it needs to be supported at the very highest level. I said leadership before, but it really needs to be the very top person.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because that's really how, on almost every culture, it really, once you get that in place, and it can be done, then you're much more likely to be successful with the rest.
Yeah, in my situation, my complete board of directors, with 3 directors, they all openly supported me. That made a huge difference for my transition, really. Because all my colleagues knew you can't mess with Remke because she's supported by the board of directors.
Well, exactly. It's a very brief anecdote. I know of a woman who went through her transition, and she left on Friday. She came back on Monday with a different name and in her proper gender expression, and her company gave her a huge bouquet of flowers for Monday morning and her new business cards with her name on it. Yeah. And it was like 10 years ago that I heard that, but I was so touched to think that your employer can be so aware of what they need to do. And that's not asking too much, right?
No, and of course, if you have a anniversary of 50 years or so, or you have a child,
exactly,
then everybody's supportive. But if you are in your new gender role or your new gender expression, why don't you be supportive as well? It's not very hard to do. You know what? I challenge everybody who's watching here today, and all of our members as well, to celebrate people who are going through their transition. Celebrate it, because I mean, it's somebody who's really totally able to be themselves at work. So it's a good thing for sure. Yeah. Okay, Mike, back to you.
Okay, we have a question from Tate, specifically to Remke. Tate is a trans man currently based in London, so he doesn't know a lot about trans rights in the Netherlands. The question is, do Dutch companies cover gender reassignment surgery, both the upper body and the lower body?
Yeah, they do, once you've got the right diagnosis. So you have to be diagnosed for gender dysphoria, and then the cost will be paid for, yeah.
But not by companies.
Well, that's by the government itself, right? Because part of the national insurance, or
national insurance company.
Yeah, and of course that depends on different companies and different cultures and different countries. Maryanne, do you have any idea how that is in Argentina?
In Argentina, we have a law which is identity law that allows you to do that, and the companies must to do that in the insurance or in the public hospitals. But there is a lot of problem to make that happen, because the companies or the employers, for example, sometimes prefer not to hire trans people because, oh my God, what happened with this situation if the trans people wants to access to a surgery or something? No. Better we don't hire trans people. And this is a quite complicated problem.
I can imagine, and we do need to highlight the fact that it's still very difficult in very many countries. But again, I
Yeah.
want to say to companies who are watching this that with a very tiny number of trans people in your organization, if you can show goodwill by supporting them, by covering their gender reassignment surgery if they choose to do so, you're sending such a positive message also to the rest of the organization, that we are an organization that respects people for their differences and and value that.
Often the focus lies on surgeries, but not all trans people go into a complete transition process.
Right.
Some of them only take hormones, for instance, and they don't want all the surgeries. So a lot of companies think if you hire a trans person, they are sick for a year or something, but that's not the case.
Yeah. So there's plenty to learn there as well,
Absolutely.
isn't there? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Mike.
Next question for Maryanne. What has been your favorite experience working with Contrata Trans?
My favorite experience. Every time that an organization or a company says, "Okay, we hired this person," I think that's my favorite moment. But I think that I have a lot of favorite moments because every person, we treat every person like every world, like a specific world, and we call them before an interview, we listen to them, we give some advice, and every time that person says thank you, oh my God, for example, I have a lot of people that start crying when I call them, and say a company or organization is looking for you, and start crying because this is the first time in 32 years maybe. So I think this is my favorite moment.
That's really touching. It's the shared human experience of being accepted, being respected for what you are. So that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mike, any more questions?
Yes. Okay, so one more question, I think maybe one or two. Fraser at Clifford Chance is wondering if the panel and TNN in specifically have any guidelines or packages of information that he could share with his HR department.
Yeah, so that's easy to answer. Yeah, there's a lot of publications. There are, I think, most in Dutch for now. There's a lot of for employees, for gender neutral toilets. There's a lot of information available at TNN's website. You can access, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Anything from Transwerkt?
Well, as I mentioned before, at Transgender Europe, there's a lot of information. You can, that's in English.
Yes.
I know.
Yes.
And well, if you have any questions about helping a trans person at work, you can always direct contact me at Transwerkt Nederland, of course. That's it for now.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. We're getting close to the end, but I want to thanks so much, Mike. I think I have one final question for each of the panelists. And I'd like to ask each of you what your one piece of advice would be to a trans person looking to integrate or reintegrate into the workplace. And then also, what is your advice for the company or companies in general or employers to help make this transition for the trans person as smooth as possible? I know we've spoken about a lot of different things, but what is it that's really on your heart now about what you would love to see as the main step?
Well, the main step for trans people themselves, be proud of who you are, first of all. Mm-hmm. Stand up straight, be proud. Okay. Reach out to other trans people, trans organizations who can maybe support you, mm-hmm. can help you look for the right way. And for companies, ask the trans person, what can I do to help you? It's that simple. How can I assist you?
So really take it from a very personal standpoint as opposed to telling them this is our process and procedure. Its first step is, what do you want?
What do you want? How can I help you?
How can I help you?
That's it.
It's simple, straightforward, isn't it? Remke, what would be your advice?
For each trans person, I would say find an ally, find someone in the company that you trust completely, that you can confide in and tell him or her or they your story, and try to find someone that will support you during the complete process. That's for the trans person. And for the company, I would say they have to support each person, including trans person, unconditionally. Support someone unconditionally despite their gender identity or their gender expression. I mean, we're all people, we're all flesh and blood. So yeah, unconditional support, David.
And that's not really that difficult, is it, Remke, to support somebody unconditionally?
No, it's not. So step over your own prejudice and see everybody as a person, which we all are, in fact.
And if I bring it back to the situation that we're all currently living through with this pandemic, it puts things in a different perspective as well. I mean, right now we're all just faces on a screen all over the world.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of made a general leveling effect. So maybe it's that much easier, I hope, to respect somebody as just a person, isn't it? Let's hope.
Yeah.
Okay, and Maryanne?
For trans people, I like to say that you need to believe in yourself and believe that a lot of people and different organizations that will help you. If you want to, you can reach. You are not alone. This phrase is very used in Argentina. You are not alone.
Yes.
And for organization and company, I would like to say that you have to know, sorry, you need to work and change. And if you want to do that, and if you want to or create new policies or new changes, please include us, talk to us, and make this with us in and not out, because for a long time we were out.
Yeah, that's hard, isn't it? Being out. It's kind of the same, I guess, for the entire community. Well, ladies, we still have a couple minutes left. I want to give you one final round. Anything else you want to add that we haven't covered yet? Anything that's not to put you on the spot too much, but
no, I would add that if somebody that is watching wants to know more about Contrata Trans, there is a website which is contratatrans.org, or write to you and you put in contact with me.
happy to do so. And again, we have so many members who have activities all over Latin America as well. So happy to do that. Nothing else? No?
Well,
I'm not going to force it out of you, sorry.
no, okay. Well, in the Netherlands, there is still a lot of work to do for the LGBTI community and for trans especially. But I also realized, because I traveled to Colombia and I also often travel to Turkey, where I have some friends also, that the situation in the Netherlands is rather comfortable. Still a lot of work to do, but the situation for trans people in Turkey, Italy, Latin American countries, Brazil, Mexico, Northern America, it's terrible. And trans people are killed.
Poland, yeah, exactly.
Poland, yeah.
LGBT-free zones.
Yeah.
Romania, Hungary.
Yeah.
Trans people are killed worldwide. They're on a daily basis.
Yes.
And that's terrible. And we should all do something about it.
I think we all, again, this is something we've echoed here throughout the webinar, but there's a responsibility also from employers and certainly from the LGBTI community to stand up for everybody in the LGBTI acronym, isn't there?
Yeah.
And we shouldn't forget these very important things, that particularly trans people are the most marginalized people in our community. We need to support them. Our
Especially
companies.
the colored trans people and the sex workers.
Yes. All right. And Remke, one final word from you. Anything?
No, I fully agree with what Petra just said. Yeah, we have to do something about the position of trans people worldwide. It's terrible. Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, ladies, thank you so much. This has really been an eye-opener. Even for me, I've been doing this for 14 years, but every time, particularly when I speak to the trans community, it's it really warms my heart, but it also reminds me that there's a lot of work to be done. So I want to thank each of you for your contribution. And poor Maryanne, from so early in the morning, you can now go have your coffee.
It's okay. It's okay.
And to all of our viewers, I'd like to mention that our next webinar will be on the 13th of November. Our program called Tech at Workplace Pride, which focuses on technically focused LGBTI people in their workplace, are having their annual event with the topic, There's Always a Rainbow in the Cloud. And I mean the computing cloud. So it should be very interesting. So thank you all very much again for tuning into our webinar. Finally, once again, thank you very much, ladies. I appreciate very much you sharing your stories with us today.
You're welcome.
Well,
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
David.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, ladies.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, David.